Now let me explain to you the different dimensions of vulnerability. Both internal and external vulnerability have two sides. The outside side, which include dangers, shocks and stress that a person is exposed to, and the inside side, which is defenseless and means not having enough resources to deal with the stress without becoming hurt. Students, now we shall also talk about the three parts of vulnerability, such as exposure, sensitivity and the ability to adjust, and how it is related with other concepts such as exposure. This is how much the calamity might affect a tough individuals and the things they care about. In addition to talking about people's lives, livelihoods and things of economic value, this term also talks about places and cultural, spiritual and personal values. There are other important pieces of physical infrastructure such as a school, daycare centers, buildings for police, emergency service, health service, communication and transportation network, and also for public utilities. It also talks about social support structure including big families, neighborhood, watch programs, fraternal groups and others. So the declaration even include things like the economy's growth rate and the strength. When figuring out how much exposure someone has, these are the parts you need to think about. The first is how often and how strong the hazard is. The second is place and scenery. The third is how many people and things are at one place. Now the second concept, as I explained to, sensitivity. This is the amount of harm that catastrophes can do to people and also to infrastructure. For instance, persons from unprivileged group are more likely to face hazards along the seaside than other people. People who are poor, old, sick, have a mental, physical disability are frequently more at risk. To understand its effect, we need to think about both parts of sensitivity. The two things that make communities sensitive are people who live there and the infrastructure. Of these two, infrastructure is easy to judge. It is easier to figure out dangers when you know the status and the quality of the infrastructure. And the third is adaptive capacity. The adaptive capacity of a community is how well it can reduce the risk of damage by taking efforts to restrict exposure or sensitivity. To comprehend the adaptive capacity parts of being vulnerable to risk, you need to know what resilience means. Students, resilience in a community is being able to use the resources it has to bounce back from bad circumstances and thrive. Communities that are strong may learn from the past and use that knowledge to solve problems they are having now. So robust systems that can adapt quickly can change to deal with coastal threats. Systems with low adaptive capacity are far less strong and much more likely to be affected by coastal catastrophes. There are many examples of how communities that are not very strong and cannot adapt well deal with calamities. So after this explanation, let me explain to you the elements of vulnerability. Different academic domains look at vulnerability from different point of view, which has led to a lot of varied ideas and ways of thinking. For example, exposure, as I explained, the presence of a potential danger impacting individual or place. Resistance, the ability to bear harm while still working upon it, and resilience, of course, the capability to bounce back and restore normal functioning after being impacted. These are the three principles that people typically use to explain the concept of vulnerability. These three parts make up most vulnerability evaluations. The basic idea stay the same, even though the words are and the terminologies may change a bit from one field to another field. Changes in the economy, politics, and the environment may have a big effect on how exposed, resistant, and resilient a system is. At the end, how vulnerable a system is to climate change relies on how sensitive it is, how well it can adapt, and how quickly and in what ways the climate change it meets. Now the question is that how much protected societies are. From here we can bring the concept of social protection. Students, in many nations, the strength of caste, class and other social distinctions changes. These distinctions shows whether a civilization is open to everyone or only certain groups. They also decide how much help and protection individuals may count on the time of crisis, which affect the strength of the social network and positive social capital. The second one is resilience of livelihood. Livelihood resilience is the ability of a community to bounce back from the catastrophes and other shocks. So communities that have a lot of different ways to make a living are better able to handle economic stress and recover after the disaster. Another concept is capital for social use. Social capital is the trust, collaboration and network that people in a community have with each other. It's crucial to know how much cooperation or possible conflict there will be in community during calamities and in order to assess risk and find strength and weakness in disaster response. So students, as I explained to you that people see vulnerability in different ways based on what they know. For example, engineers and scientist community think of vulnerability as a technological concern, but climate scientists think of it as the chance and effect of climate related catastrophes. Social scientists, however, they concentrate on socio-economic aspect of risk, highlighting how societal structure, institutions and disparity influence vulnerability to damage. To make the idea really valuable, you need to be able to precisely name the occurrences, the setting and the natural or man-made circumstances that led to it. We can only grasp the exact force that makes someone or anything more vulnerable after that. Now after this explanation, let me explain to you India's vulnerability to climate change so that being a geography student you can understand it in a well manner. As you know that India is a country which is very vulnerable because many people live there. India is the country which is at a higher risk because of its demographic constraint and how much it relies on industries that are susceptible to climate change. Let's observe at the main place where vulnerability are most likely to happen. For example, the Himalaya region, the environment in the Himalaya is quite delicate. Glaciers are melting quickly, which changes how rivers flow. There are more landslide, cloudburst and flash floods. People who depend on subsistence farming for a living are in danger. Few examples I would like to cite in this context. You may be knowing about the 2013 Kedarnath catastrophe. That is a clear illustration of changes that occur place because of the climate change. The second example is of plains of Indo-Gangetic. This area is quite weak because of very hot weather, pollution in the air, not enough water, river including Ganga, Yamuna, Brahmaputra, these are flooding in different seasons. Heat waves in North India are happening more often and lasting longer, which is dangerous for those living in the cities and the countryside. Other example I would like to cite from coastal India, states like Odisha, Andhra Pradesh, West Bengal, Tamil Nadu, Gujarat have to deal with cyclone, erosion of coast, salt water intrusion and the rising sea level. Cyclone Fani and Cyclone Amphan inflicted billions of dollars in damage. I would also like to cite example from western part of the India. As you know that Rajasthan and certain areas of Gujarat have desertification, drought, not sufficient water, loss of animal and crops, Besides that, the territories on islands, crops, and at the end, I would like to take you to the Andaman and Lakshadweep Islands. These are in danger of disappearing. The sea levels are rising, killing the coral reef. Storm surges are there, risk of being displaced, weaknesses in the cities. Apart from this regional categorization, urban India has its own set of problems. For example, the heat island effect, bad drainage leads to flood in the cities, contaminated water, not enough potable water, weakness of slum, pollution. Almost every year, cities like Mumbai, Delhi, Chennai, and Bangalore have to deal with climatic emergencies. And with this, I am now concluding the whole chapter. In summary, I would like to show the significance of the vulnerability. As I described it to you, that vulnerability has several sides to it. To pinpoint the exact causes in each case and come up with effective solutions, there is a requirement to study in what makes people vulnerable who are at risk, and it has to be firmly encouraged. By taking vulnerability in account when we think about the disaster risk, when we see that risk is not just based on how strong a hazard is and how many people or things are in danger of being harmed by it, but it is also based on how likely it is that people and economic resources will be lost or damaged. And the most important thing is the disparity between the specific non-extreme dangers and the significant effects or disasters that may include may be predominantly ascribed to differing degrees of vulnerability and exposure. In many situations, especially when there are big hazards, people's susceptibility is that most important thing that affect their overall risk. Certain demographic groups are intrinsically more susceptible to injury, loss, and adversity when confronted with certain threats, and even among these categories such as individual susceptibility level that also differs. After the catastrophes, these vulnerable groups have the hardest time restoring their life, which makes them more likely to be affected by future disaster. So, lowering vulnerability is important to lowering the change and effect of future calamities. A greater knowledge and a study of vulnerability is the only way to achieve this. There is no one technique to complete a vulnerability assessment since it is so complicated. Any assessment should optimally assess vulnerability comprehensively. As I mentioned, these are two sorts of methods, one that look at socio-economic vulnerability and the other that look at the physical, or we can say that environment susceptibility.